So once again, good morning to everybody. And I did something strange this time, which I don't normally do. I prepared my talk. So if you see me floundering around looking uncomfortable, it's because I'm not used to having to actually look at what I wrote. It's only half true, don't worry. I don't know if I can turn it up. So I love the title for this morning's talk. I'll just try to turn up my volume and hopefully I can compensate for the microphone. I love the title of the talk. I think it's very apropos. It is Waiting Joyfully, presumably for the Lord. That part, I just got the waiting joyfully part. And what I'm going to do, I'll give you the kind of outline ahead of time, because whenever you get one of these kind of broad themes, at least if you're me, your brain starts going all over the place, wondering, okay, there's so many different directions you can take this. Where do we want to go? I'd like to begin with, I kind of decided to follow the St. John Paul II methodology. When he would write an encyclical or one of his important documents, he tended to begin with a gospel or a biblical passage, rather, and kind of do an analysis of that, and then draw out applications, kind of do theological applications, and then lead into the practical. So that's what I'm going to try to do. We will do a little Bible reflection together, and then I will try to bring a few points out of that, and then we will get into the practical at the end. So, as we enter into this Advent period, the logical thing for us to meditate on is the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Holy Family, St. Joseph rather, right? And what I'd like to do is go back to Luke chapter 1, which is the Annunciation, when the angel Gabriel appears to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Well, first of all, before getting going though, who was the Blessed Virgin Mary and what was it like being there? We all know that Nazareth was a small town, right? What I don't think we understand was just how small it was. How many people do you think lived in Nazareth around the time of the Blessed Virgin Mary? Obviously, we weren't there, so I don't have an exact number, but roughly they have an idea. How much? Good guess. Probably about 100 people. So, I don't know how many there's, which means you guys would already be, how many are you? 4, 8, 10, 12. So you would already be a considerable percentage of Nazareth just represented in this room. When we do Advent by candlelight, there will be more people in the gym, by far, than lived in Nazareth during the times of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's on a hillside in a desert country, and life there would have been difficult. What would the life of the Blessed Virgin Mary have consisted in? We know that she was conceived without sin. She was absolutely, totally united to God. So she would have been a woman who prayed a lot. But frankly speaking, from the moment she got up, which probably would have been with the sunrise, until the time they go to bed, because they didn't have electricity, which also would have been somewhere around the sunset, not too long after the sun went down. Most of her day would have been work. You get up and what do? The first thing, you need to draw water. You need to there wasn't a lot of wood. There's got to be a way that you light fires. You need to take care of things like cooking and cleaning. Have any of you, for example, had to do laundry with a broken washing machine? When you have to start doing laundry for the household and you don't have, I guess you guys go to the laundromat if that happens. Well, she didn't have a laundromat. And she didn't have a wash machine. Granted, I don't think they did laundry as often as we do, but the point being, just the most ordinary, basic day-to-day things were real chores. Lighting a fire, finding what you're going to eat, basic cleaning, getting the water to clean, going into town and buying things. She didn't have a station wagon or a minivan. All of these things were chores. And being the Blessed Virgin Mary as a young teenage girl, healthy and bouncy and vibrant and all that, And being somebody who is as holy as she is, I also suppose she would have spent a good bit of her time doing charitable deeds for the older ladies in the town and running errands and dropping off eggs for Mrs. Schwartz or whatever in her neighborhood. And that would have been a lot of her day. So she lived in this climate of simplicity, of poverty, of silence, and throughout that day, she would have been in this kind of formal and informal dialogue with God. And that's important to kind of get her background, to understand when the angel Gabriel appeared to her, what would have been the setting. Well, he appeared to this beautiful young lady that was absolutely, from the first moment of her conception, imbued with the Holy Spirit. She was the perfect creature. She is and was the new Eve. Just as Eve was created perfect, sinless, spotless, in perfect union with God, the Blessed Virgin Mary was created like that, and each moment of her life she steadily increased in her holiness, in her capacity to say yes to God. And the angel Gabriel appears to her and says, Haire kekartomene. You got that? Okay, talk's done. That's all you need to hear. Haire kekartomene, which is the Greek. Hail, we would translate that as hail full of grace, right? So haire, what does that mean? By the way, I'm not one of these Greek scholars. This is just me trying to look smart because I flunked Greek. I'm totally horrible at it. And Latin and all those. That's not my thing. Haire, the word literally means rejoice. Okay, you've probably seen there are church movements and songs and music groups and whatnot called haire, and you wonder why do they have that weird name? Well, it comes from the Greek. It means rejoice. So when you see some of the Bible translations, you will see, depending on which translation you're reading, hail. Like that was the Latin Roman thing. Hail, hail full of grace. Unfortunately, that's also where Heil Hitler came from. It was Heil. It was the Germanification of that old word. And sometimes you'll see rejoice, highly favored daughter. Is that a good translation or a bad translation? The answer is yes. Which translation is better? Hail full of grace or rejoice, highly favored daughter? The answer is yes. They're both legitimate because what was expressed kind of expressed both of those things at the same time. The word full of grace, those who are more dogmatic and old school and get into, Latin Mass and whatnot, and this is not a criticism or showing favor or anything, it's just simply a statement, we'll tend towards a hail full of grace. And the idea being that it was an expression from the angel Gabriel who comes and he sees this creature that is absolutely spotless and sinless. And the angel Gabriel, recognizing this teenage girl, who's probably like 13 or 14 at the time, is holier than I am. Imagine an archangel sent from heaven with a mission from God, coming into the presence of a greater being than himself and recognizing it. And recognizing this little girl is holier than I am. And not just a little bit, by far. She's on a completely different plane from the angel Gabriel. And the angel Gabriel, recognizing, would refer to her as full of grace. Mary didn't even know that about herself. She didn't study dogmatic theology. She knew that she loved God. She knew that it was practically inconceivable for her to even consider saying no to God. She lived in this atmosphere of total simplicity and total union, intimacy with him. But she didn't know she was conceived without sin. It didn't occur to her. She certainly didn't know all the theological implications. But the angel saw her and said, wow. He's a different species, but in a certain sense, from like a spiritual perspective, he gave her an ooh la la. A spiritual ooh la la. It's just like, whoa. But at the same time, he was also saying, rejoice, because you have been favored by God, because there is a mission coming to you. And all of the words that he says that follow were messianic words. They were words, and they were words that she would have picked up on because he was approaching her in a very similar way to whenever an angel in the Old Testament would approach anybody and gave him a special mission, like Gideon, hail champion, and Gideon's hiding in a well somewhere. He's like, what are you talking about, champion? Okay, you're going to defeat I forget who they defeated. You're going to defeat the bad guys. And he's like, well, if you say so, but frankly, I'm hiding in a well right now in order to hide our food so we can have something to eat. So, okay, you're going to have to show me some signs. And he does, But the idea being, whenever an angel appears to somebody and they give those words, hail, gives them this mission. So the angel appears and says, hail, highly favored, rejoice, highly favored, and starts saying, you have been chosen. The exact words are going to be, the Lord is with you. That's also whenever an angel gives a mission, he says something along those lines. You have found favor with God. Behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus. He will be great and will be called Son of the Most High. Son of the Most High was a title for the Messiah. They would refer to King David with that language. He wasn't the Son of God in the same sense that Jesus was, but the idea was that the King of Israel was kind of like an adopted son. He carried the favor of God with him. And so she's already recognizing this angel is saying, I am going to be the mother of the Messiah. She didn't understand necessarily that the Messiah was going to be God himself. The Lord will give him the throne of his father David. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever. All of this is messianic language. And of his kingdom there will be no end. So Mary says to the angel, how will this be? Since I do not know man. Now it's interesting. She does not do like her cousin, or uncle, I guess, Zechariah, and say, essentially, I don't believe you until you give me a sign. She never doubts. She never says no. She simply wants information. She says, look, I want to do whatever God wants, but you need to give me a minimum of information to work with so that I can give God a full yes. I do not want to put myself on a pedestal, but like, for example, as a young man, when I was discerning a vocation, and it became clear to me, it's like the Legion of Christ was on my radar. I remember in my prayer telling God, okay, I'm not normally going to do this to you, but I need you right now to make it clear to me that you want me to take this step. Because if I say yes, I do not trust my emotions later on. So if I say yes, I will not leave until they kick me out. Once they kick me out, I will know that will be a clear, unmistakable sign I'm not supposed to be. But, just the fact that I wake up and I'm feeling sad one day, I'm not going to trust that, right? So I kind of told God, essentially in my prayer, I'll do whatever you want, but let it be known. And then he just poured on the emotions, and I was just oozing with all this, heavily, and until I said yes, and then the reality check started coming later. But that's okay. He gave me the clarity that I needed in that moment to be able to give him my yes. And this is something similar to what the Blessed Virgin is doing here. She's saying, give me what I need to work with so I can figure out how I'm supposed to take the next step. And he says to her something that she got more than she bargained for. The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the child to be born will be holy, the Son of God. God himself will be, if you want, the father of this child. You will carry God himself in your womb. And she gives this beautiful response, which summarizes her entire life. Fiat mihi secundum verbum tuum. This is me showing off again, pretending I know Latin. Be it done unto me according to your word. That's the fiat mihi secundum verbum tuum. Okay? Let it be done to me according to your word. What does that say? It says, whatever God wants, whether I understand it or not, whether it makes sense to me or not, whether I know just whatever God wants with me, I will give it. And that was her constant response throughout her life. I was listening to, how many of you ever listened to Father Ripperger? He's an exorcist, actually. He's becoming kind of a phenom on YouTube. He's very good. He's a very good theologian. He's very St. Thomas Aquinas. But he was apparently in one of his exorcisms when he was, interviewing the devil. He was getting information out of him, and he basically said, why, what is it about the Blessed Virgin Mary that you can't handle? Because it's like, in a certain sense, the Blessed Virgin Mary has more influence in an exorcism than God, in a certain sense. That would be total heresy to say, because anything good she has comes from God. But it's more humiliating to the devil to be cast out through the intercession of some lowly human being. It's like, if I were to get beat up by some, MMF champion, some world champion fighter, okay, it's expected. If I were to get beat up as a grown man by some 4-year-old girl, and she just like body slams me and just takes me for a ride, it would be like, okay, I'm never going to show my face in public again. And that's kind of like the devil getting, when the Blessed Virgin Mary shows up. But when he was interviewing him, he says, what was going on there? Why did you rebel? And part of it was because God apparently showed Satan ahead of time what was going to come. A lot of people talk about the idea that God would become man. That alone was degrading to Satan. But it was more than that. It was, he knew that there was going to be a mother and that she would be greater than him. He would never be in first place. He would always be in second place to a human being. Because even with Jesus, okay, he's human, but at the same time, he's also God, so I can deal with that. Okay, you're still God, so you're supposed to be bigger than me. But Mary? And Satan could not handle that, apparently. And that was, I'm getting sidetracked, but that was, and it's apparently the thing that he said, that not only that he couldn't handle the fact that she would be greater, but he said, the other thing is, her life was a continuous yes, nonstop. It was repeated over and over and over again. The angels only had one test. It was for all the marbles, one yes or no answer. Will you obey? Yes or no, boom. And they knew, because of their angelic knowledge, they knew all the implications and everything. We are not angelic. We live in time and we change. We fall and get up and fall and get up and fall and get up. The Blessed Virgin Mary, it said, not for a single split second of her life did she even consider giving a no to God. And that was the thing that to Satan was just so like, and then the exorcist, Father Ripperger said, yeah, but you couldn't even say yes to God once. It's true. So you couldn't even do that once. But that was the beauty of Mary. Okay, so what does this have to do with us? Well, I think if we want to understand how Mary lived her Advent, how Mary lived her months of preparation, first of all, you have to understand who she is and kind of where she's coming from. From that moment onward, we know that, especially going back to the Gospel of St. Matthew, then we know all the, she went off to, in Luke, she went to visit her cousin Elizabeth for 6 months. We know in Matthew she came back, and there's St. Joseph kind of puzzled to see that she's pregnant. Well, that wasn't part of the plan. And there's a lot of filling in the gaps that the gospel leaves us. But we know that at the last minute, 9 months pregnant, days before giving birth, God says, get up, go to Bethlehem. In total uncertainty, in poverty, in uncertainty, in discomfort, all of that. And never once did they complain, never once did they doubt. The Blessed Virgin Mary and Joseph, in all of those trials, lived with great joy and trust and peace of heart, even when life didn't seem to make sense. So again, the question is, what was going on? Well, I think a couple of things. I'm going to give some points, and we're going to touch upon them again later. Because of the Blessed Virgin, the combination of the fact that she was conceived without sin, which unfortunately none of us have that luxury, but because she was immaculate, but also because of her upbringing, God was creating an atmosphere that enabled her to live with that kind of joy. And there are three things I'd like to touch on. It is silence, poverty, and docility. Okay? So silence. When you're in a small town, she had time to pray a lot. And when you're kind of out into the countryside, she did not have all the distractions. You and I, unfortunately, we are surrounded by distractions. We have phones that buzz and ding and do all kinds of things. I remember before cell phones were a thing. I remember my dad, because he had his own business, and this was back when they had the cell phone that was the size of a shoebox, and you plugged it into your car with the antenna on the top, and so they were analog. But I remember saying to my dad, hey, do you ever consider getting a cell phone? Because he was doing business with Asia at the time, and it's a time zone changes, and he's like, son, I don't know if I want somebody bothering me when I'm in the car. Yeah. Now all of us get bothered when we're in the car, and we don't think twice about it. But he was not a religious man, but he just wanted his space of not being bothered by things. And it's a real challenge for us. How are we going to live interior silence when we live in an atmosphere where continually we are being bombarded by stimuli that are telling us, you have to respond to this or you should feel guilty? Okay, she didn't have that. And I think there's a lot, we'll return to that point later. I think there's a lot that we can touch upon there. Poverty. She lived in physical and material poverty, but that's not, physical poverty for its own sake is really not worth a whole lot. In the gospel, when they talk about blessed are the poor, depending on the translation, some of the gospels talk about poor in spirit as opposed to physical poverty. The only function of poverty really is detachment. Now, material wealth, is it a bad thing? Not necessarily. Otherwise, Jesus would never have spent money. He wouldn't tell us to give money to the poor because then we would be doing something bad to them, right? The wealth in and of itself is a good thing. It is simply an expression. It's almost like a sacrament, if you want. It is a representation of a quantity of human labor applied to material. That's what money comes down to. This piece of paper represents so many man-hours of human labor, and we choose to give it value, okay? In and of itself, a good thing. The problem with material wealth is not that it's bad, but that it's dangerous. It is attractive, and we can very easily get attached to it. And frankly speaking, everybody in this room, including myself, is attached to it. We all are. And if you don't think you are, then the simple answer is, okay, let me start taking things away from you and see if you freak out. Let's begin with your hot water. It could be whatever. Anything at all that we are attached to becomes a challenge to God. It's not that the thing is in and of itself bad. Your health, we can be attached to our good health, right? It's not that it's bad to be healthy, but if we are attached to it, then it becomes a point where if God were to say, if I were to ask you, can I take this away? Would you say yes? What if that's the case? It could be whatever the particular thing is. So material possessions in and of themselves are not bad, but the attachment to anything at all that is not God, sooner or later it's going to have to go. Either in this life or in purgatory. If you want to get to heaven, you cannot go to heaven attached to anything at all, ultimately, that is not God, or that does not lead you to God. That was the kind of poverty the Blessed Virgin Mary had, and her growing up in that physical poverty that she had and helped enable that. She lived in absolute freedom. And that enabled her, when God came a-knocking, to be able to give God this absolute, radical, heartfelt yes, no matter what. Whatever he was going to ask of her. And again, I think the best evidence of that was when God comes knocking and says, okay, get up and go to Bethlehem with nothing but the clothes on your back, and a total sense of insecurity, not knowing where you're going to give birth. It could have been in the highway for all she knew. And nonetheless, be it done unto me according to your word. Absolute, total availability. So, I am actually going to get a little less academic and a little more spiritual later, but how does this attach, or how does this lead to joy then? Well, I'm going to say something, again, sounds heretical. In a certain sense, Buddha got it right. You know why? Now, Buddhism took a partial truth and made an entire system out of it, so I don't recommend anyone here become a Buddhist. It will not do you any good. But the fundamental idea behind Buddha's enlightenment was this. He was a prince in India, and he had never experienced any kind of hardship in his life, and then he went out into the countryside and he experienced the misery that only India could offer. I mean, if you want to experience real human misery, go to India, I'm told, you know. And he was horrified. And he went and sat under the tree for, 40 days and meditated and fasted and did one. And his conclusion was, all material, anything that you are attached to is evil. And suffering comes, and there's a certain amount of truth. It's a partial truth, but there's a certain amount of truth here. Anything that you become attached to is evil, and therefore, if you want to become enlightened and live a great life, you need total detachment, which is this nirvana. It's just kind of, for example, I'm attached to food. Well, now I feel hunger pains. Hunger pains make me feel, pain and grumpy and tired. And if I just didn't have to deal with that, life would be peaceful. And if you apply that to absolutely everything in your life, then you have the Buddhistic sense of nirvana. In a certain sense, it's the opposite of Christianity. Because Christianity is that God is all good and God wants to give you all good. It's not just he wants you to be neutral, as if you're basically dead. It's that he wants to fill you with absolutely every conceivable goodness, and if we insist on clinging to things that are partial goods, then he can't give us the greater goods. So in that regard, we are kind of the opposite of Buddhism. Okay, but so if we want then to be able to experience the joy that God wants to give us, we're going to need to experience some of the same things the Blessed Virgin Mary experienced, which is that sense of simplicity, of poverty, of availability, not to let anything else get in the way. And that's really what Advent is for. I had a section from Thomas Aquinas, and I'm not even going to go there, even though it was kind of cool. But you know what? I'm sure I've been talking too long for you. Well, very simply this. Thomas Aquinas tells us there's two causes for joy, okay? We experience joy when there's something good that we already possess. For example, being with your spouse, especially when you were in the honeymoon years, right? Before you got married, you thought about your spouse and, stars and bluebirds and rainbows and all those things. And there was the desire to be with them. And then when you finally got together, even if you didn't do anything, even if the only thing you did was sit together with your arms around each other's waist, looking at the sun go down, you felt, and maybe you still do, or hopefully you still do, you feel just joy. You feel peace. You have the possession of the thing that you were looking for. The other thing that can make us happy is when there's something that we love, and we see that even if that thing that we love is missing, for example, one of your children. Your children go off to college. You miss your children, you love your children, you kind of wish they were around, but they're not. But even though they're hundreds of miles away, one of your children graduates summa cum laude, or, is the captain of the basketball team, or accomplishes some great thing while they're at college. Even though they're distant, for their sake, you feel joy, right? And again, this comes down to the idea that joy, therefore, is going to be very closely related to love. Only things that we love can truly give us joy. So if we want, during this Advent, to grow in joy, it's synonymous with saying, let's learn how to grow in love. Okay? Let us learn how to grow in love. So, very practically, very practically, I'm going to give a few tips. And all of this long-winded wind-up was to give you tips that you already knew, so I'm sorry. Okay, some good ideas in order to live a great Advent, in order to grow in joy. Some of them we've already touched on. I think the most important one I want to say would be this. Let's get rid of the clutter. What does that mean? I remember a couple of years ago when COVID was happening and you guys had a lot more time on your hands to pray and do things. And you remember when the book on St. Joseph came out a couple of years ago and everyone started doing the 30 days to St. Joseph, whatever that thing. And at the same time, there was something else cool. And that was at the same time that Bible in a Year came out and everyone wanted to jump on board with Father Mike Schmitz. And each one of those things is great. But I remember one of the ladies in Regnum Christi saying, she's on this Zoom call, and she said, I'm living this frenetic Lent because, we all decided to do everything. Each one of these things was good. But it's you're stressed out because you feel like I'm falling behind in Bible in a year, but I've got to make sure I do my St. Joseph thing. It's only 30 days long, and then I've got this other... You're all laughing. You know, you did it. You're guilty. Okay? And those are good things. There is no season of the year like Advent and the Christmas season for filling our lives with clutter. Clutter is Christmas parties, Christmas shopping, Christmas this, Christmas that. By the way, I used to live in the Philippines 9 years, as some of you know. Do you know when Christmas season starts there? Okay, it's much longer than here. Take a guess. August. You're always exaggerated. I'm sorry. She's actually not too far from the truth. That's the point. When do you think Christmas season starts over there? I mean, here essentially it's like Black Friday, right? That's when Christmas really gets going. How's this? September 1. The Burr months, which is September, is the first of the Burr months. So, which means from September 1 onward, you start seeing Christmas decorations, hearing Christmas carols, and seeing stuff sold in the stores. So by the time you arrive to Christmas, you're exhausted. It's oh, thanks God, I can't enjoy another day of Christmas. It's and these people, especially if they've got any money and they live in the nice neighborhoods, it's 2 weeks straight of feeling morally obliged to go to every single Christmas party of every single friend or relative, and they're just dragging themselves by the time they get to Christmas. And it's they don't want to do anything. It's just oh, can we just collapse? Okay, I'm exaggerating. And by the way, I make fun of Filipinos. I love the Philippines. Anyone who knows me knows that I love the Philippines and I would go back in a heartbeat. So any Filipinos who are listening to me in this recording later, you know that I love you. But we can do that here too. Okay? And I'm shooting myself in the foot because I've already offered you two different things. This week we've got a Lenten retreat and Advent by Candlelight coming up, and both of them indirectly. Well, one is directly by Regnum Christi, and the other is indirectly by Regnum Christi. And they both could be qualified as clutter, okay? So it's not to say that all of those things are bad, but it is to say let's pick our fights. Let's determine what are the handful of things I really am going to do. We do not need to do everything. We do not need to go to everything. We don't need to buy everything. We can have a simple Advent with our family, or a simple Christmas with our family, and the world will not explode. You may actually find, if you have a simple Christmas celebration with your family that somehow involves Jesus, it would be nice if he was in there somewhere. You may actually find that you have a more beautiful Christmas. Some of the most beautiful Christmases I know of are when people don't have jobs and it's just simply do things very simply and humbly, and they tell me, I felt like the Holy Family. It was all focused on Jesus and family, and that was it. Now, we need to do some prayers and things. It is good to do some of these things, but we don't need to do all of them. Okay, that's the big one right off the bat. Now, having said that, what are some of the things we can do, aside from go to Father Eric's retreat and go to Advent by Candlelight? I remember when I was a kid, the Advent wreath. I did not grow up in a particularly religious family. My dad left the church as soon as he possibly could, which was years before I was ever born. My brother followed suit as soon as he thought he could get, didn't want anything to do with the church. By the time he was in high school, he would only go to Mass because my mom would kind of pull him by the ear. And then as soon as he thought he could get away with it, he really just distanced himself. And most of my friends were not Catholic either, so it's not like I grew up in some Catholic Mecca. Okay, I grew up in Seattle. You get it? That's enough said. Seattle is pagan. But I do remember this. The Advent wreath was cool. There's something about waiting each week and knowing we have one candle and it's lit and there's a symbolism there. And every night, and it's kind of fun because as little kids, it's like you get in fights and get mad at each other and lose all the sense of what Christmas is for so that you can be the one to light the candle, right? But there's something beautiful about an Advent wreath. Said with prayer, and the idea is not just light the candles and just walk away. There should be some prayers. There are different forms out there. I really don't care which ones you use, but having a little ceremony where you are taking stock of, it's the first week of Advent. It is the second week of Advent. By the way, this year we totally get gypped because the fourth Sunday of Advent is Christmas Eve. So you get like about 6 hours of the fourth week of Advent, and then it's already Christmas. So related to that, you don't have to have the wreath. Another similar practice is the nativity scene, which is more than just a decoration. And there are traditions where you don't put the baby Jesus in until Christmas, and maybe some people have like the wise men traveling, so they move each week to get a little closer. Those things sound like they're silly, but they're actually kind of cool. And what do they do? They bring the Bible, they bring the story to our imagination and to our consciousness. And again, the Advent, the nativity scene should go with some prayers. There are different forms out there. You can Google them. There's an infinite number of things you can do that are cool. But something, so that it's not just, I feel pressured to decorate the house, and okay, because I'm Catholic, I'll have something about the wise man in the corner. But it's really about, I feel the pressure of making our house perfect. No. Just simply a corner. It's like having a little chapel in your house, a little prayer corner. Okay, thirdly, how many people remember novenas? Advent novenas are beautiful. They don't have to be super long. It's not like you have to do a novena where you pray 5 rosaries every day. But there are novenas where it's just like one little prayer, and for 9 days in a row, they pray this little prayer leading up to Christmas. But again, that has the function of bringing us, calling down God's grace upon ourselves and our families, first of all, but also putting us in that frame of mind to prepare ourselves, to take stock of what we're doing, to forget about our shopping, to forget about all the other things that are they important? Sure, but are they the essential? No. And to put in the center the goal for which all of this celebration takes place. And God will bless those who do things like pray novenas. He will bring peace. He will bring joy. Especially if we can do it as a family, by the way. Anything that you do, prayers that you do together as a family, are always particularly powerful. When I was a kid, Advent was kind of like, I don't know about you guys, but at least in my house, because my mom had been a nun for a couple of years, so, they obviously told her to go home and get married and all that stuff before she ever considered having me. But when I was a kid, I remember Advent was kind of like a little Lent. Did you guys grow up that way? Like Advent resolutions. Do you remember those? When's the last time any of us did an Advent resolution? Which usually was some sort of Advent sacrifice, we give up chocolate until Christmas or one of those, kind of like Lent. No? Okay, good. There's one Catholic in the crowd. Okay, What's the purpose of an Advent resolution? And especially if you're giving up like a little sacrifice. Why does that have any value? Well, first of all, anytime we make a sacrifice, it implies an act of love. Okay? And when we make a sacrifice with a due date, like Christmas, you are creating a sense of expectation. And when that sense of expectation is centered on the fact that Christ, his birth is coming, okay, Lord, I'm going to unite myself with Mary and Joseph, and I'm going to offer up this little sacrifice as part of my gift. Imagine again the wise men traveling. They made plenty of sacrifices going through God knows where on their camels with gold, frankincense, and myrrh, so that they could present their gifts. Well, when we make an Advent sacrifice that's going to last these weeks, and it can be something as silly as giving up chocolate or whatever, then I'm traveling with the wise men in a certain sense, so that when Christmas comes, I can give God this gift. All these accumulated little sacrifices, I get to present them before the Christ child. And that's a beautiful thing. And that also brings great joy. I guess you guys know the beautiful and tragic story called The Gift of the Magi. It was written by a New Yorker. Okay, the gist is this. It sounds depressing. It's actually very beautiful. There was Jim and, I forget what her name was. I wrote it down, but Jim and Della. So they were both a young, poor couple growing up, I guess in New York, because he was a New Yorker. O. Henry wrote it. Della had this spectacular, gorgeous long hair. It actually went all the way down to her knees. And it was just glorious. But they were poor. And she married Jim, and Jim was just fighting to make, ends meet. But Jim had this beautiful gold watch, which was an heirloom. It was the only nice thing he possessed, and it was given to him through his family and passed down through the generations. And they each wanted to do something beautiful for one another. So Della went, and right before Christmas, she had all of her hair cut off. And she sold it for money, because that's how they used to make wigs with real human hair, in order to buy a beautiful gold watch chain for Jim. So he would have something for this watch. And Jim, unfortunately, went and sold his beautiful gold watch so he could buy a beautiful hairpiece clip for her hair. And Christmas comes, and both of them, it's like, now, it sounds depressing, but there's a beauty in that. They each gave the very best thing that they could for the other. And each one of those, her hair represented her entire youth, her entire life. I don't know how long it takes to grow hair to your knees, but represented her entire life of waiting and fidelity and gift of self to him. And his watch represented his rootedness and his family and the fact that he was always punctual. He came home for dinner punctually every night and all of that. And it was the gift of the greatest things that they had. And those sacrifices, although there's a depressing element to the story, imagine the exchange of love between them when each one of them recognizes, even though it seemed like it was done in total futility, each one of them recognized, this person gave the best thing that they knew how to give to me, and we did it for each other. Okay, that's the beauty of a sacrifice, offered up in the proper way, not to be masochists, but to do that with God. And it can be small things. It doesn't have to be your 10-foot long hair. Okay. I'm going to cut things shortish, cut things off right around here. But anyway, I think these give us a few ideas. The idea behind Advent is it is a time to put Christ in the center. It is a time to set aside a lot of our distractions in order to unite ourselves with the Holy Family in the kind of preparation that they lived for the birth of Christ. So anything at all that we can do that enables us to be more like them and to unite ourselves with them will be a beautiful preparation, and it will lead to joyful living of Advent and a joyful Christmas celebration. So without further ado, I am going to cut things off, and I guess you have time for questions, or I don't know how you want to make things work here.